Hey everyone, welcome back to Path of Exile, and in today's content we are doing Cyclone CoC Desecrate and Volatile Dead. And we are gonna spice it up by using some very obscure gear choices. Things like a Terminus Est, a Talisman, a Circle of Anguish, alternate quality gems, etc. It's a cocktail of interesting choices and you'll see why in a bit. Originally, I wanted to play with Asenath's Chant and do some CoC Vow action as well, but it was kinda boring, so I decided to scrap that idea and respec into this build, which in the end turned out pretty good. However, before we go any further, this build is pretty much torture to both you and your computer. The visual clutter gets real nasty and the build's mechanics screw with the game's performance enough to make your PC cry, so keep that in mind before starting this build. With that said, the build shines in mapping, but the single target is a bit lackluster. You can tackle endgame bosses, but it is gonna require more than just holding right click and occasionally tapping some keys. Still, I've got the Conquerors and Sirius on Awakener level 8 alongside a unique contract and a random synthesis boss. Anywho, if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe to the channel, otherwise a rating and a comment are also welcome. And remember, the video is timestamped for your viewing pleasure. With all of that said, let us talk about this build without trying to sound too phallic about it. Alright, so as always, it's time for the skill tree, and we are doing this build as an assassin, because let's face it, his job is dealing the crits and that's why he is the prime candidate for this experiment. However, I will also recommend a Necromancer, and that's mostly because she has a lot of offensive and defensive bonuses when having corpses nearby or while consuming corpses. Since this build spawns and consumes corpses on a regular basis, Necromancer is a very good choice, if not better than Assassin. Anywho, moving on to the passives, this is a level 94 Assassin and I do recommend pushing to that level because there are some things in this character that cannot be skipped at all. Besides that, we befriended Alira because she gives us the crit multi and resists, which are pretty useful. Now for the actual passives, this is where things get interesting because if you noticed, this skill tree is quite simple for a cast on crit character. We only care about dodging, frenzy charges, critical notes, some elemental damage stuff and life along the way. And that's it really, no obscure or complex pathing. However, we are using some cluster jewels that are very important to the character. The first large cluster jewel has 8 passives at most, and in my case one of the two notables is Cremator, which is going to destroy ignited enemies that are killed with hits. This is mandatory because we don't really want to get deleted by undead effects, and at the same time it helps clear out some of the clutter on the ground, which should also help keeping those frames healthy. The other node is not getting allocated because we want to save up on some points. And for the other large cluster jewel, which again has 8 passives at most, it has Widespread Destruction, Corrosive Elements and Prismatic Heart, and in my case I allocated all of them. The most important node is Corrosive Elements because it makes Volatile Dead have a 25% chance to apply fire exposure, which is -10 fire resistance on enemies, and that way we can skip using Wave of Conviction on a totem or something. And that makes Corrosive Elements kinda mandatory. As for the medium clusters on this build, we've got 4 of them with 5 passives at most, and at least 3 of them have the same nodes: Precise Focus and Unwavering Focus. Precise Focus gives us global crit chance and crit multi while channeling, and Unwavering Focus gives us 40% chance to avoid getting stunned while channeling. By using 3 of those, we get 120% chance to avoid getting stunned while using Cyclone, and also a bunch of crit chance and crit multi while cycloning around. Super useful to our character and kinda mandatory in the end. The last medium cluster jewel has Evil Eye and Lord of Drought. Evil Eye is going to blind cursed enemies on hit, and Lord of Drought for some area of effect and flammability curse effect. Good stuff. And finally, for jewels, all of the regular jewels have increased life, global accuracy rating and crit multi. In some cases, fire or area damage, but that is up to you. The Watcher's Eye that we use has damage against enemies on consecrated ground while affected by Zealotry, and life gained on hit while affected by Vitality. This is how we are gonna get our quote-unquote life leech, because Vitality is now a flat mana reservation aura, and at level 1 it reserves very little, but that's okay because we get the full benefits of it with this Watcher's Eye. If you cannot find a similar one, crit multi with Anger, crit chance with Zealotry, elemental penetration with Zealotry, fire damage or fire penetration with Anger, crit multi with Precision alongside the Vitality mod are all equally useful. And now we are gonna move on to the gear, and we are gonna start with the elephant in the room, the Terminator Whist. And yes, I can already predict it. You get more DPS out of a CoC sword, bro? Why no CoC sword, bro? 0 DPS build, bro. Okay, as an arc aside, I'm using the Terminus Est for a couple of reasons. It has great crit chance, attack speed, and comes with a movement speed bonus. It generates frenzy charges on crit, and finally, it is hella cheap, even 6 linked. When I built this character originally, I had like 7 exiles in total currency, so I had to scramble to get it done. The Terminus was a no-brainer back then, and considering a CoC sword is kinda expensive right now, I opted to double down on the Terminus. Plus, it got the job done, mostly. Obviously, a cast on crit sword is better, but at that point the character changes a lot. Like, you're gonna have to compensate for the loss of accuracy, crit chance and attack speed, and that is just gonna make things a little bit more expensive, but if you feel like using a cast on crit sword, that is up to you in the end. Moving on to the body armor, we want as much life, maybe some resists, but mostly the attacks have X amount to crit chance, as this is gonna help us sustain the cast on crit with Cyclone quite comfortably. For the helmet, we want Volatile Dead detonates an additional corpse as the enchantment, alongside as much life, resists and accuracy. If possible, try to gamble a Warlord Exile Slam to hopefully get either elemental damage or another power charge, which are prefixes. For the gloves, we want as much life as possible and as much spell damage as possible. If you can get attack speed, that's great, otherwise we need an open suffix to craft increased crit chance and elemental damage if you've crit recently. For the boots, we want as much life, resists, movement speed and strength as possible, if possible enchanted with elemental penetration. Moving on to the jewelry part, one of the rings has to be a Circle of Anguish. If you can get flammability on hit as the implicit, great. Otherwise, try to get one with useful implicits. It needs fire damage or Herald of Ash buff effect as the DPS mod and fire resistance as the secondary mod. If you didn't get flammability on the Circle of Anguish, the other ring needs it. Alongside that, it needs as much life, resists and accuracy as possible. The amulet is a talisman, and I recommend one with increased life as the implicit and as much DPS stuff as possible. Things like increased crit chance or crit multi, spell damage and or fire damage, alongside life and resists. Since talismans can now spawn with a random anointment, mine came with Searing Hit, which gives us a spell crit and crit multi against burning enemies. You probably won't find a 1-to-1 copy, but there's plenty of cheap talismans to experiment with, so in my recommendation, search for something with useful modifiers and then research the anoints, because they are kinda cheap right now as people haven't caught up to their true potential yet. For the belt, a Warlord influenced Stygian Vice with life, resists, strength and fire damage. If you can, benchcraft increased damage, and the jewel on the belt has life, a resist and fire damage to spells. And finally for gear, the flasks. We use a Wise Soak, a Diamond Flask and a Cinder Swallow Urn. If you happen to have a Bottle Faith, it replaces the Wise Oak. To round up the guide, for gem setups we've got Cyclone, Cast on Crit, Anomalous Inspiration, Anomalous Spell Cascade, Volatile Dead and Desecrate on the Terminator Whist. On the gloves we've got Herald of Ash, Anomalous Cemetery, Precision and they are all linked to an Enlighten level 3. On the helmet, Withering Step and Dash, linked to a level 7 Arcane Surge and Second Wind. On the body armor, Ancestral Protector and Combustion, and on the boots, a level 1 Divergent Vitality and Vaal Righteous Fire. And now, conclusion time. It is a very interesting way to have fun with Cast on Crit. We are using some very out of the ordinary, borderline hipster gear and mechanics on this one. The mapping is a crap ton of fun, but the performance can get a bit jarring. Yes, the Terminus is not the optimal weapon and you are better off with a Cast on Crit sword instead, but again I was cheap and I didn't get one of those early on. It got the job done in the end, so that's all that really matters. Anyways, I'm gonna leave you with the build versus bosses gameplay now, but as a disclaimer, I did die twice to Cirrus, so keep that in mind when playing this. It can do endgame fights, but it's gonna require a little bit of try-harding to get it done, so yeah. And that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and be sure to subscribe if you are new around here. Remember to take care and I'll see you on the next video. Peace out.
So easy. Just need a moment to catch my breath. Die. Die.
Watch! Guilty!
They became reliant on them. I am not so foolish.
Die.
This is gold!
Be silent. Die. Die.
This city is nothing!
Interesting enough to warrant all this pain.
Low on mana. Die.
Is gold!
Die.
Beyond, there is only horror.
Die.
This city
Of death, my heart races. I am alive.
everlasting fire!
Feel the thrill of
The void! Die! Be silent! Everlasting fire!
leaning.
Is
Just need a moment to catch my breath.
silent! Is gold! Everlasting fire! Is gold!
Feel the thrill of
The void! Be silent in fire!
feel the thrill of
The void! Is gold! Be silent! Everlasting fire!
you will long for
Non-existence! Silent! Is gold! Everlasting fire!
at least.